Matt here again. Today I'm going to go over the case of Laurie Swaim Hearin. She has been missing from Jackson, Mississippi since July 26, 1988. Hearin was the wife of Robert Hearin, who was a prominent businessman from Mississippi. His net worth was estimated between $100 and $200 million. He was considered a financial wizard. He was very prominent in the community. On July 26, 1988, Annie was hosting Bridge Club at her family's home. The meeting began at 10:15 a.m. The final guest to leave left at 2:30 p.m. And the Hearin's housekeeper left at 3 p.m. Robert came home, her husband, at 4:30 p.m. Since Annie's vehicle was in the driveway, Robert initially didn't really have any reason to be suspicious of her being gone because he felt that she had left with friends. However, after some time passed, by 7:30, he did get suspicious because it was unusual for her to be out that late. At that point, he contacted his son-in-law to help search for her. When she hadn't been found after some time after that, he called the authorities at 9:49 p.m. Since investigators discovered drops of blood on the carpet and also blood smeared on the front door, they suspected that potentially some foul play was involved. The blood, which was later tested, matched Annie's blood type. Remember, this was in 1988. They didn't really have the elaborate type of genetic testing we have today, which can be very specific to individuals. So blood type was used. It was linked to Annie and with respect to her type, and so it was assumed that by law enforcement that she was struck on the head by an intruder. Also found was a ransom note, and the ransom note read, "Mr. Robert Hearin, put these people back in the shape they was in before they got mixed up with school pictures. Pay them whatever damages they want and tell them all this so they can know what you are doing, but don't tell them why you are doing it. Do it before 10 days pass. Don't call police." On FBI Files featured this case in an episode called Banished. In that episode, it stated that Robert had called the police. I think the order was that he called the police even though he got the information not to. Unsolved Mysteries featured it in 1988. I believe they seem to indicate that the letter was found once authorities were in the home, and at that point there was no choice in calling the authorities. They were already there. So I'm not quite sure the order on that, but either way, the police were informed. The ransom note referred to a franchise called School Pictures. Robert had taken over the company in the 1980s, and the letter listed 12 franchisees, basically who had financial difficulties with the company. Annie Hearin's abduction was announced by the Jackson media at a press conference during the evening of July 28, 1988. So that was 2 days later. It gave them a little bit of time to see if anything would come about without it being introduced to the media, but when nothing happened, it was announced. Authorities investigated the case with the 12 franchise owners as the primary suspects. Since the word damages was used, it was maybe a little bit telling, and so it kind of seemed to the authorities logical that Newton Alfred Wynn, one of the franchise owners, was most suspicious because he was a civil attorney from St. Petersburg, Florida. That sort of the term damages is kind of relevant in law circles, and not to say that an average person can't be familiar with it, but very likely a lawyer would be familiar with it, and that sort of narrowed it down a bit. Although there were 12 suspects, so I suppose the list was narrowed down somewhat to begin with, but that word being in the letter did narrow it down further. Remember, the letter was written in such a way that made it seem like there was some intentional misspellings, and so for a word like damages to be used when everything else seemed like it was written by somebody who didn't even really know how to spell, it was a little bit telling and did help the investigators. Wynn was ordered to pay the company, School Pictures, over $150,000 after a court battle in 1984. Since that led to bankruptcy and asset forfeiture to the state, which included jewelry, property, and a car that he loved, he was pretty bitter about it. He felt that the company ruined his life, essentially, that it was a big deal to him, and it was just not something that he let go very easily. Neighbors later identified Wynn as the driver of a white van with Florida license plates, which had been seen near the Hearin residence on July 26th. So that was something that sort of put him right at the scene of the crime. A press conference was held in September of 1988. In this press conference, Robert appealed for his wife's return. He received a letter several days later that was determined to feature Annie Laurie's signature. The note stated, "Bob, if you don't do what these people want you to do, they are going to seal me up in the cellar of this house with only a few jugs of water. Please save me, Annie Laurie." The letter was postmarked from Atlanta, Georgia. It was assumed the letter was not written by Annie, as she was not really one to use the terms, some of the words that were found in the letter. For example, jugs, she would have used, say, bottles, for instance, and seller wouldn't really be a word that she would have used. That's what the FBI Files episode stated about it. So it didn't really seem like her her style of writing. However, it was definitely her handwriting. So it was established that she was alive long enough to write that letter, and she survived whatever initial conflict there might have been. What ended up happening after that, Robert mailed nearly $1 million in ransom money to the 12 franchisees listed. Basically, he determined how much each of them had to settle in court for their court cases / bankruptcies, depending on the specific individuals. By getting that information, he was able to send out that money to the franchisees. Wynn returned his portion of the funds to Robert. It seemed as if what he really wanted back was his beloved car, perhaps, some of his jewelry, some of his property. Also, possibly in my mind, I thought about this, that possibly because he was involved with the murder, he realized this just wasn't going to go as planned. I don't know how anybody would think this could go well. Like, this isn't a movie, and to kidnap somebody and hold them hostage, this is just something that does not happen in real life. Not to say that there haven't been other cases like this, but it just doesn't work out seamlessly. There could always be something that goes wrong. Mrs. Hearin had also some digestive issues that required medication, so she would have died without her medication, and possibly he did hold her for a bit and she died, and then he realized he was weighing over his head, and this was going to spiral out of control. Maybe that's why he returned the money. It was just he didn't want to be part of this mess, or maybe he wanted to get his possessions back, but that would be really hard for Robert Hearin to know that, because that wasn't specified in the letter, and I don't know how a person would be able to guess that he wanted these very specific things back. I think Robert did the very intelligent thing, which was based on what information he had, which was to send back the money that each franchisee lost. That would be the only information he would have. It would be very hard for him to investigate all 12 people individually, especially with so little to go on in the letter. Robert offered a reward for information. Wynn was apprehended in March of 1989. In 1990, Wynn was convicted of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, extortion, and perjury in connection with Annie Laurie's case. 2 accomplices received immunity in return for their testimony against him at trial. I think that's kind of important, because in order to make this case, they needed that testimony, and I think immunity is sort of needed for that. It's not going to help a person to testify if they are going to risk a judgment themselves, and especially when they didn't really have a lot to do with it. They were definitely involved in some way, but the two people I assume are referred to here would be the paralegal who offered an alibi for Mr. Wynn on the night of the kidnapping, and also his ex-girlfriend who had sent the letter. So again, these people, sure, they committed some crime or may have possibly had a reason to believe something was suspicious, but it was not the same as kidnapping, extortion. So I don't think that they should be punished really for that, especially if they're cooperating. So it was nice for me to read that they ended up cooperating and not being punished themselves. After serving his sentence, Wynn was released from prison in 2006. No one was ever charged with committing the actual kidnapping. Laurie Hearin's body was never found. Someone by the name of Newton Alfred Wynn, living in Florida, died in August of 2012. I would assume that was the Mr. Wynn in question, although I'm not clear on that for sure. Robert died of a heart attack on November 28, 1990. Annie Laurie was declared legally dead in 1991. That allowed for their family to settle their estate, with both parents dead at that point. Her case was featured on Unsolved Mysteries in November of 1988, and also on FBI Files in December of 2001 on an episode entitled Vanished. Annie would be 100 years old if she was still alive. She would be turning 100 this year, so I feel it's very unlikely that she is still alive. Some references that helped me to make this video would have been Annie Laurie Swaim Hearin's page on the Charlie Project, as well as the Unsolved Mysteries Wikia page for Anne Hearin. And there's a photo of Anne when she was kidnapped. Basically, she was 72 years old then, or 73. I guess it depends sort of on sources, but her birth date was 1915, so I'm not clear on the month of her birth. Again, she would be being born in 1915, would be turning 100 this year. Very unlikely that she was alive or even survived a month after kidnapping, if even that amount of time, because again, she needed some medication for some digestive issues that she had, medical condition. So unlikely that she was alive. And that's another photo of Annie Hearin closer to the time of her kidnapping. There's an article called The Kidnapper's Revenge, which was published in August of 1988, which you can find if you search online, which covers this case. It basically details some of Mr. Hearin's business ventures and the fact that he was very prominent in the community, and this was basically a high-profile case as a result. But in my mind, it illustrates that not everything necessarily goes well for you just because you're rich. There's still some tragedies that occur. I don't think that necessarily gets spoken about a lot, as rich aren't really considered victims in any way, even though most of them started off poor themselves and are just regular people. But I don't think that gets discussed enough. And Annie Hearin, yes, she was rich, but she just seemed like a kind old lady. Her son, Robert Jr., seemed very concerned about his mother, and just regular human beings. I sort of wish sometimes the rich didn't get prejudged in this fashion. It seems like there's a lot of attempts to not stereotype the poor, not stereotype certain groups of people, but I don't really feel the rich get that much respect in that sense. Like, in terms of not necessarily judging them, they are human beings. Mr. Hearin and his wife were human beings, so was his son. I feel that they do deserve sympathy and support. Just because they're rich, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be entitled to that. Newton Alfred Wynn also appealed the case, and you can see that if you search United States of America, Plaintiff Appellee versus Newton Alfred Wynn, Defendant Appellant. This is on Justia US Law website, and it details his case for appeal. Not to say it was valid. He did end up going to prison, although nobody was ever charged with the kidnapping. Annie Hearin's body was never found. So those are my thoughts on this case. I would love to get a discussion going about this. I find the case incredibly sad. Just because the family was rich doesn't necessarily, again, mean that they were bad people in any way. I know they lived in a nice home, and I'm sure they had the finer things in life, but what is life really when you don't have your loved ones? In this case, Robert Hearin Jr. had to lose his mother, and shortly thereafter his father. The sad thing about that is quite possibly the stress of this case did contribute to Robert Hearin Sr.'s death, which is very sad in my opinion. The whole case is sad, and I imagine that Mrs. Hearin's last thoughts would have been very terrifying. Her last actions, pretty much. I mean, I don't know how long she lived after the case, but it has to be something when you get kidnapped. Even to her, I mean, granted, I wouldn't be afraid of a 65 or 66-year-old man kidnapping me. Really, I would be able to defend myself as an able-bodied young man, but I can't imagine how terrifying it would be for somebody who really wasn't prepared for this. And who knows, I mean, anybody can be knocked over the head and bound, and at that point we are pretty helpless. And so it's all very tragic to me, and I would love to hear your thoughts about it. So any information that you could post on this case, I'd like to hear. I would love to get a discussion generated. Anything to help the family, even today, find closure, which seems less likely as time passes, would be a good thing. So once again, thank you for watching, and I hope I can keep updating this series regularly, this YouTube channel, and any advice or opinions on how I can improve the channel, please let me know. Thank you.